Nowadays, Kamek's role as a secondary member of the core Mario cast is pretty much set in stone. As Bowser's right-hand man, most modern Mario games at the very least feature him to some extent. Not always as a playable character, and not always significantly, but there is usually a role for him to play. Case in point, the Mario movie. But make no mistake, this was a long time coming. Kamek had to fight, came mighty close to being written out of the Mario continuity, and even now you can still ask the question whether Nintendo of Japan, i.e. the ones actually making the games, see Kamek the same as Nintendo of America. And that has everything to do with Kamek's origins. As you probably know, Kamek made his debut in the first Yoshi's Island, meaning he is actually technically a Yoshi character rather than a Mario one. Despite Super Mario World 2 literally being part of Yoshi's Island's title, Nintendo doesn't really consider it a Mario game at all. It's never brought up when Nintendo celebrates the Mario games, whereas even fringe titles like Mario Maker or Mario Run are. However, while Kamek as such didn't make his actual Mario debut until Mario Party 2, the enemy species Magic Koopa, which Kamek is a part of course, do hail from Mario games, specifically Super Mario World. And here lies a difficult problem. First of all, anyone with eyes can recognize that Kamek looks virtually identical to a regular Magic Koopa. The only real difference is in the broom Kamek occasionally uses, but this is not a staple of his design. He often uses it, but not always, making it hard to visually recognize whether Kamek is in a game or just a standard Magic Koopa. But at least we in the West only have to wait until a dialogue box pops up and we see the name of the character. In Japanese, remember the language the games are made in, Kamek's name is Kameku, which is identical to the name used for the Magic Koopa species. You see where I'm going with this? The idea that Bowser has a consistent Magic Koopa right-hand man who is always the same character with a very specific name is essentially the result of a mistranslation. For Super Mario World, the name Kameku was localized into Magic Koopa, and for Yoshi's Island, it was essentially literally translated into Kamek. As such, you could make the argument that the idea Kamek is even a character is completely created by the localization teams and was possibly never the intention of Nintendo of Japan in the first place. Hell, we can't even say for certain that Kamek is supposed to be one character. For all we know, the idea in Japan is that Bowser has an entire platoon of high-ranking Magic Koopas on brooms that help him out. Now, that is likely not true either. The Kamek, as seen in Yoshi's Island, is very clearly one character. He's not a random Magic Koopa, there is the presence of the broom, which regular Magic Koopas have never been depicted to use, and some games, like Mario & Luigi Brothership, make a difference between Foot Soldier Magic Koopas and Kamek by giving them a different color. So I'm not here to tell you that Kamek is a fabrication and that he isn't even actually a character. That is not the case. What is however the case is that we in the West have a different view of Kamek than they do in Japan, because we always know when we see a blue Magic Koopa whether it's Kamek or just a random one. Japan doesn't have that benefit. I could open this video by saying Kamek is a Mario Kart World as an item, because that's its name in the West. But since its name is identical to the species, it is possible that plenty of Japanese players don't think this is Kamek at all, just a random Magic Koopa. Which then also brings up the question what Nintendo even thinks. For all we know, the idea was never for this to be Kamek. That could just as easily have been a creation from the localization teams. I mean, Nintendo themselves occasionally get this confused too. There have been several profiles over the decades that describe Kamek as a Kamek, such as on Super Mario 3D World and Super Mario Galaxy's websites. There is a character in Mario & Luigi Superstar Saga called Psycho Kamek, despite having absolutely nothing to do with Kamek, except for the fact they're both Magic Koopas, and his trophy in Smash 4 is also quite telling. While the description is clearly about Kamek, his first appearance is listed as Super Mario World. This would be a mistake in English, but in Japanese, sure, why not? After all, Kamek shares his name with the common Magic Koopa, so there is much less of a need to separate him from the rest of his species, as the West always does. However, looking at the evidence, I think it is clear that, especially since the Mario rebranding, also called the bland or clean era, where Nintendo created a very narrow and focused idea of what the Mario brand and franchise is, that Kamek definitely exists, also in Japan. It is around this era that Kamek really ditched his competitors, more about that later, but also where Nintendo went out of their way to separate Kamek from his fellow Magic Koopas. In pretty much every game he played a significant role in after this time, he was either 1. The only blue Magic Koopa with a broom, like the new Super Mario Bros. Games. 2. The only blue Magic Koopa, like in the aforementioned Brothership for example, or 3. He is the only Magic Koopa period, like in many Mario Party games. Furthermore, there is plenty of official artwork that shows Kamek alongside other members of the core Mario cast, always identified by his broom, as well as of course the Mario movie, where Kamek plays rather prominent roles. Point being, at this point, Japan also agrees that Kamek is a separate character from the rest of his species, similar to Yoshi or Toad or Birdo. But if you've ever wondered why Kamek was treated so weirdly for so long, despite being a pretty recurring character, well, this is why. You may think, why the hell does Bowser's right-hand man have so few playable appearances? But in Japan they're thinking, why is this random Magic Koopa suddenly so important? And that last thought definitely also existed in the past at Nintendo themselves. I cannot be the only one who was just utterly confused when a new Mario game would come out and Bowser just had a new Magic Koopa top henchman, all to effectively replace Kamek, who had to that point already been introduced and made recurring appearances. Probably the first of these to come to mind is Kammy Koopa. She was introduced in the first Paper Mario and then returned in the Thousand Year Door, functioning pretty much identical to what Kamek would end up becoming later, characterization and all. Like, they could have replaced her image and name with Kamek in the Switch remake and nothing else would have to be changed. They are that similar. But while I and plenty others were probably left puzzled why there was suddenly this Kamek-like character introduced rather than just using Kamek, the answer is obvious now. At this point in time, it wasn't really clear yet that Kamek truly was his own separate character, and so, for the Paper Mario games, Intelligent Systems just created a new one that was clearly a different character. Keeping the Japanese audiences of the time in mind, it honestly makes perfect sense. I think everyone else would have made the same decision. The one that is still controversial and up for debate today, I would argue, is Kamela, a boss from Super Mario Galaxy. The only Magic Koopa boss to ever appear in a mainline Mario game and not be Kamek. What does however make Super Mario Galaxy very confusing beyond this is the opening cutscene. Here, Mario is attacked by a Magic Koopa who in all English material is referred to as Kamek, the titular character. Think the guidebook, the official sticker line, and as such, the Mario Wiki now also considers this the return of Kamek after a lengthy absence. There is, however, only one problem. We cannot necessarily trust that the localizers here represented the original vision of the creators. The name they received to translate was undoubtedly Kameku, but that also means Magic Koopa. Magic Koopas do appear in Mario Galaxy, so it is perfectly plausible that this was never meant to be Kamek, especially since his broom is nowhere to be seen. And you would think that if the idea of the developers was for this to be Kamek, Bowser's second in command, that he would be the boss rather than Kamela, right? We will never be able to prove it, and I understand following the line of the localizers is all we can do, but I personally suspect Nintendo never intended for this to be Kamek. This is just a random Magic Koopa. And now you may say, okay, we may not have cold hard proof this was always meant to be Kamek, but who else could it be? Well, not only are Kamek's name and design identical to the rest of his species, which probably made Nintendo of Japan less inclined to use him than the Western audience would have expected, there is also another important thing to consider here. Kamek wasn't the first. Kamek is only the right-hand Magic Koopa that stuck. But prior to his debut in Yoshi's Island, Bowser had already been depicted with a Magic Koopa commander several times over. Yoshi Safari features a boss fight against a prominent Magic Koopa. 3 different lines of Mario mangas, being the Super Mario Adventures, Super Mario Kun, and Mario Kondasha mangas, had already introduced a distinct Magic Koopa character to serve as Bowser's retainer, and in Super Mario RPG, which was developed around the same time as Yoshi's Island, Bowser had a Magic Koopa leader commanding his troops, known as Wizard Koopa. And he actually does have a separate name in Japanese, being Kamezado, so for clarity's sake, it would have been better if he had stuck around rather than Kamek. So in the end, we in the West may have been left a bit confused why Kamek made such few appearances despite seemingly being important, but in Japanese the whole situation was an outright mess, and Kamek wasn't remotely as pronounced or clear a character as he is here. And technically he still isn't. Although right now he finds himself more in Yoshi or Toad territory, although Nintendo has also taken precautions to ensure most Toads don't look like the Toad nowadays. And that is why the changes in Brothership are actually quite smart. It makes it so it is also immediately clear in Japan that Kamek is separate from the everyday Magikoopa, which, with his prominent role in the movies and more recent games as well, is probably necessary if they want to do more with him. But whether that change will stick? I'm not sure. Magikoopas as a species or enemy haven't appeared in any title since Brothership, so it's still up in the air, but Nintendo changing the appearance of an entire line of enemy characters based on design changes made by a different company, Acquire in this case, doesn't feel like them. But we can't rule out that the decision was made by Nintendo themselves and Brothership was simply the first game to have to follow it. Time will tell. Did you ever get Kamek confused with a regular Magikoopa? And would you even want to see him in more games? Share it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribing. If you really want to support me, you can now become a channel member to get all kinds of fun perks and help me keep bringing these videos to your doorstep every week. For now, thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.